Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is call. Let's take a look at some of the ways that we can use this verb. The first way you might hear the verb call is to mean to give someone or something a specific name. So as we hear the news of a new baby being born, you might hear someone ask, what are they calling him or her? So again, this is all about a specific name. A second meaning for call is to cry out either words or sounds. With this definition, we can refer to humans or people. For humans, it might be something like yelling help or watch your step, right? That would be an example of calling for this definition. But we also use it for animals and the different sounds that they might make. A third way to use the verb call is to mean to contact or attempt to contact someone by phone. This is probably the definition you're most familiar with and what you thought of when I said the verb is call. The fourth meaning that we're going to look at for call is to announce or decide that something is going to happen. So an example of this is if a group says a meeting has been called for, and then they say a particular date and time, right? So they're announcing that the meeting is going to happen. There are some additional meanings for this verb, but they get very specific. And I don't think they're quite as common, so we'll focus again on things I think you're more likely to either hear or see when you're reading. You should know that call is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, all we need to do is add ing to form calling. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. The verb call ends with a voiced L sound. So the ed is going to make a D sound. Called, called. Now let's take a look at some phrasal verbs. And if you're looking at the top right side of the screen, you will see my note here that this is just part 1. So I want you to know that call has many different meanings. Once we bring in prepositions to create these phrasal verbs. So I'm not going to talk about every single meaning or every single phrasal verb that uses call because this would be a really long video. I have tried to pick out things that I think are more commonly used. So let's take a look at the first one. The phrasal verb is call back. It means to return a phone call, and you've probably heard this usage before. If someone has left a message in your voicemail, left a voicemail message for you, they might say, call me back, right? They're asking you to return the phone call. A connected meaning, though, is just to call someone again. Here's an example of this usage. No one's answering. I'll call back in an hour. And the I'll call back is an example of simple future usage. The next phrasal verb we're going to take a look at is call for. It can have a few different meanings. We're going to look at 2 of them. The first meaning is to require or need. Here is an example of this. Your new job calls for a celebration. So perhaps someone has just found out they have been offered a new job. It's really exciting. They share the news and they're saying, the person responding to this says, this requires a celebration. A second meaning of call for is just to make a phone call. Here's an example of that usage. Did you call for a cab? There's a simple past tense question. The next phrasal verb we're going to look at, call in, has a few different meanings. We're going to focus on 3 of them. The first, again, is connected to cell phones, telephones. Its meaning is to phone a specific place. So here's an example sentence. If you call in to the radio station, you might win $500. So here we're calling this specific place. You might hear people mention they're calling in to contact work for more information or to ask a question. That is also pretty common. A second meaning for call in is to request to have a meeting or to request to have a talk about something. Here is an example of this usage. His boss called him in for a private meeting. What you should know is call in generally has sort of a negative meaning to it. You are not being asked to have a meeting to receive praise or good news. Usually something bad has happened and there needs to be a discussion about it. So again, adults might be used to this particular meaning when they think about being called into their boss's office or called into their supervisor's office. But students can probably relate to this definition. If you heard that somebody was called into the principal's office, that was bad news. That was a sign somebody was in trouble. The principal usually was not calling a student into their office to tell them they were doing a really great job. The third meaning of call in that we're going to look at is to request a specialist or expert. Here's an example of this usage. We're going to call a surgeon in for a consultation. So I can imagine someone is meeting with a doctor and they are considering perhaps somebody needs surgery to recover from a particular injury, but they're not sure. So they're going to ask this specialist or expert for their opinion and advice. Let's continue looking at some more phrasal verbs with call. The next one we're going to look at is call off. Again, this can have several different meanings. We'll look at two. If we call something off, one possible meaning for this is to request that an animal stop bothering or pursuing someone or something. Right? So what this verb looks like, or what this phrasal verb looks like, is shouting maybe a certain pet's name, asking them to stop or to come towards you. So here is an example sentence. Please call off the dogs. They're making the children nervous, right? So again, you're getting the dogs to go away from the children. A second meaning for calling something off is to mean canceling an event. Unfortunately, this might be a phrasal verb you have heard a lot of since March. Right? Here's an example sentence. They have called off the party due to the pandemic. Another phrasal verb that you might hear is to call on. It can mean to ask or to appeal to someone or some groups. Here is an example sentence. Volunteers were called on to help with storm cleanup. So, community members were asked to volunteer their time. The next phrasal verb we're going to look at is call out. Again, it could have a few different meanings. We'll look at two. The first is if we call someone out. And generally what this means is we are criticizing. We're making other people aware of someone's actions that are bad or unacceptable, inappropriate, something like that. So here is an example of this usage. The team members called the customer out for bad behavior. Call out, again, could be to shout out something. This connects back to an earlier definition that we looked at. So imagine you're hiking on a trail and perhaps it's icy or the trail isn't well maintained. Right? So we might tell the person in the front, call out a warning to those behind you. if you see something dangerous or difficult. The last phrasal verb we're going to take a look at is call up. It can mean to summon for action or service. You might hear this phrasal verb used to describe military members, particular people that are in our reserves. So they are not current active members, but they might have their assistance requested or called. That's how we get to this phrasal verb. But you'll also hear it some with professional athletes, and that's going to be my example here. He was called up from the minor leagues after another player was injured. So this is a phrase you'll hear if you watch baseball at any point in time. This is something that's really common because generally they have long seasons and people get sick, get injured, and they will get sort of a replacement player for any sort of period of time that they wish. Now, I haven't prepared additional sentences that practice different verb tenses because we had so many different phrasal verbs. I hope you can see some different examples. I pointed a few out earlier, but I'll do kind of a quick review. Here was an example of an imperative, as was this call out. Right? Here, we've got present perfect with have called off. Here's an example of the passive voice that we practiced in last week's videos. And then here is simple past tense. So now we're ready to take a look at some words that are related to call. And the first one we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So the exact same spelling, the exact same pronunciation. Just like the verb, it can also have a number of different meanings. We're going to focus on 4 possible meanings for this noun. The first is a cry made by a person or an animal. Here is an example of this particular usage. Did you hear a call for help? A second way to use the noun call is to mean speaking to someone on the phone. Here's an example of that usage. I'll give you a call at 5 tonight. A third way we can use the noun call is an appeal or demand for something to happen or for something to be done. Here is an example of this usage. There have been many calls for policing changes after the death of Breonna Taylor. So there have been many appeals, many demands for changes to our policing system. A fourth way we can use this noun is to mean a decision or a ruling that has been made by an umpire or another official. So again, this usage really connects to sports. Here is an example of that. The referee has made some bad calls during the game. So many times students will ask, how can I tell if something is being used as a noun or a verb? And there are certainly clues in sentences. So in the first 2 sentences, you can see the article a right before it. That's a good sign that it's a noun. Here in the last example, we had some bad. So we've got an adjective there describing it, another good sign that it's a noun. Another related noun is a caller. This could be a person who makes a phone call or maybe pays a brief visit to someone at their house. So here's an example of this noun in a sentence. Caller number 7 is going to win free gas for a month. This might be something you hear if you're listening to a radio station at any point during your day. The last thing we're going to look at is an adjective. It's uncalled for. And if you think back to our earlier phrasal verbs, call for meant needed. Uncalled for is not needed. It's unnecessary. And another usage is not justified. And I'm going to point out that when you look up this adjective, you'll frequently see a hyphen between the two words uncalled for, but as many writers use this every day, you don't see that hyphen quite as commonly. So I took it out to mimic what I looked at in various newspaper articles and such. So an example of uncalled for. The vandalism in the park was uncalled for. It wasn't needed. It's not justified. That is what the sentence is communicating. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.